everyone. This week we're looking at trauma and violence. And this is the point at which we draw quite a few connections to other units that we study in the criminology degree, because we look at the concept of therapeutic jurisprudence and we look at the idea of the different roles of things like problem-solving courts in intervening in the area of crime control. So our primary focus here isn't really on crime, it's not really on the system itself, but we are looking at the ideas and the concepts that come into those through those initiatives into the treatment of trauma. Now, you've probably looked at therapeutic jurisprudence previously. You will definitely look at it again in units like community justice innovation. And what it primarily is the introduction of a health perspective and a social care perspective into criminal justice. And instead of asking questions that traditional theories of punishment do about deterrence and rehabilitation and fitness for return to society, therapeutic jurisprudence looks at the needs of healing for everyone involved, and particularly for certain offenders, the fact that healing them of fixing their particular problems may actually stop them reoffending more effectively than putting them on a rehabilitation program. So it's a different approach. It's one that has picked up a lot more currency in the last 20 years or so, and it surprisingly in a good way, has a lot of cross sector, cross politics support. I think for people on the left, it is seen as something that is better than the brutalising aspects of the criminal justice system, particularly prisons. For people on the right, it's seen as a more personal accountability, because people are required to stick to treatment programs and meet certain goals. So it's very much based on that idea of personal individual responsibility. And judges like it too, because it's a different sort of role for them, because they get more involved in cases and they don't just sit back and have to rule at the end of the process. They can actually get more engaged and involved. So obviously victims definitely require treatment and suffer from trauma, but people who perpetrate violence are often people who have been victims of violence themselves. So there is a what we call the circle of violence, or the cycle of violence, where we look at the need for treatment to stop that cycle going forward. And definitely we know that brutalising people in prisons, we know that doesn't help. We know that people typically come out more likely to commit violent crime than when they went in, and more likely to commit high-risk violent crime. So this is all about looking at those alternatives, and it's about incorporation of a public health approach, and that's what the guided reading really talks about this week. The use of things like non-violent communication training and use of interventions that are different from the traditional punishment-based ones of the justice system. So we look at public health and global medicine as two different approaches that are quite interesting. Public health draws on epidemiology and a lot of the sort of the big picture aspects of medicine, and looks at, rather than curing a disease, solving the problem that creates the disease in the first place. And global medicine is much more individualized and looks at the role of the doctor in the globalized society. So they're micro and macro. The public health is very much a big macro picture, looking at stats, looking at top down, looking at patterns, looking at maps. And global medicine is looking at the individualized treatment that doctors do to do good for patients. And there's lawyers have their own ethical issues when dealing with clients, and as do doctors are not entitled to ask whether or not they like a person or they think a person is a good person before they get treatment. The Hippocratic Oath requires them to treat people regardless of any individual judgment a doctor may make. And that's a really interesting input into this system and a really different approach to justice. There's a bit of a specific section in this week's notes on drugs and trauma specifically, because we do have a bit of a downward loop in terms of drugs and violence, and there's a whole series of factors that make that worse. And part of that is the heavy criminalisation of drug crime, and the use of things we've talked about earlier. The 3 strikes rule lead to mass incarceration, lead to brutalisation of people. They become more violent. They're more likely to commit violent crime. People are more likely to resort to violence when drugs are illegal, and are harder to access. It's harder to get people onto treatment programs with illegal drugs. There's a whole series of problems with that now, looking at issues like drug decriminalisation, may break some of those cycles, and those cycles of violence and trauma that are connected to drug crime. So it's an interesting case study in terms of what can be done for harm reduction and what can be done as an alternative to the idea of mass incarceration. And that's a topic we've touched on several times in this course already, the legacy of the Clinton administration's 3 strikes rule, the fallout of mass incarceration, the impact of communities of colour in the United States, and the fact that this rule, this 3 strikes rule that was supposed to be used for violent criminals, then ended up being used for people who were involved with drug offences or drug possession offences, and forced people to be into long prison sentences for relatively minor drug offences. So again, we're looking at alternatives, and you will have in other criminology units looked at drug courts as an alternative. They're an interesting situation in Australia because every state's doing something different, but drug courts are one way of trying to implement that idea of therapeutic jurisprudence to provide an option that's actually going to provide a solution. And as I said just a couple of minutes ago, one of the things that's quite surprising about it is that it's been so popular across the board politically. You'd expect that there would be much more of a backlash against, particularly from the far right, about the drug courts being, a weak alternative to Parliament. But I think even they see the rigorous programs that you have to adhere to deal with addiction being much more useful, and there's certainly not a soft option compared to prisons. And the last note I wanted to, again, we don't have a lot of time in the course to look at a lot of this stuff in a lot of detail, is that idea of interagency collaboration, because what you get once you start using something like a therapeutic jurisprudence is you start having a lot more cooperation, collaboration between bodies. Now again, if you're in the Bachelor of Criminology, we'll be leading into that in a lot more detail in the 3rd year unit, Justice Strategy and Alliances, where we're going to really dig into what you can do to make all the different parts of those systems work together and work harmoniously. But I wanted to flag it here now that one of the obstacles and hurdles that we have to introducing therapeutic jurisprudence is, of course, all these different agencies having their different approaches and their different turf and their different reporting lines and so on. And that's something that needs to be solved as a practical matter before we go further. Okay, so just another reminder in terms of workshops. We've got those mediation workshops for the rest of the term. Make sure you get proactive, get your times booked in, and start getting those done, because you're going to start running out of time soon, and you're going to find out all your assignments in other subjects are due in at the same time. So yes, I'm nagging, but I'm nagging for a good reason. Get yourself organised now and save yourself some pain later.